This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Joe Kennedy. So he used to be an assistant football coach at a public high school in Bremerton, Washington. And after games, he decided at one point that he would start praying at the 50-yard line by himself. And then some coaches, some of the players on his team, they noticed that he was doing that, and some of them actually decided to join in with him and pray after the games. And then some of the players from the other teams and coaches from the other team would come in and pray after the games. And this went on for years. And no big deal, right? I mean, we live in a free country. We have freedom of religion. We have freedom of expression. Well, apparently not in the ridiculous state of Washington, because the members of the school board did not like this at all. Like, surprise, surprise. They said that they were worried that it would not only violate the establishment clause of the United States Constitution because they're moronic numbskulls, they said that it was potentially dangerous, that it was endangering students somehow to pray after a football game. So they tried to force Coach Kennedy to stop praying. He refused, as he should have, and the school responded by not renewing his coaching contract at the end of that season. They essentially fired him, is essentially what they did. And then he rightfully decided to sue the school board. And that fight, through the different appeal courts and everything like that, made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 2022. And no spoiler alert here because this is old news, but the court actually ruled in his favor, in the favor of Kennedy and his team, voting 6-3. You want to guess who the dissents were? They voted 6-3 that the government cannot suppress an individual's expression of religious observance. And if they do so, they are violating the right to free exercise and free speech. And this entire story, which again, this thing took, I think he said like 8 years, was from, soup to nuts is how long this process took. This entire thing was turned into a major motion picture last year, 2024, called Average Joe. And this was made about Coach Kennedy and his life and the struggle for religious liberty and what was going on in his personal life. And so that's what we talked about today. We just went right from, what was your upbringing like? Why'd you join the Marine Corps? Why'd you want to be a coach? Like, why did you feel like God was telling you needed to be a coach, even though, spoiler alert, he didn't have any football coaching experience or football experience whatsoever. He was a wrestler and a boxer. And then the entire process. So everything that I just gave you there, the intro, we talk about in detail in this interview. So guys, I'm not going to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Joe Kennedy, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Hey, good to have me here. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, this is great. I'm excited to talk to you about your story. Crazy story, but don't worry, guys, we will get there. But we do kind of need to start small here. And so you have I guess you have a very interesting track record, but it all comes because you decided to follow some dead Middle Eastern Jewish carpenter and those types of things and dedicate your life to following Christ. And so for you, like, when did that happen? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Is this something that, just kind of came to you as an adult? Let's just start there.
Yeah, I grew up in a Catholic family, and it really didn't take. So I pretty much was a rebel, just didn't want to have anything to do with God. And it wasn't until I got out of the Marine Corps before I found actually my faith and started living for the Lord. So it was well into my late 30s.
Okay, and so what was it specifically for you that led you, Catholic upbringing, you hear that kind of a lot. You have people that are cradle Catholics, but then they don't actually have any faith whatsoever. So did that maybe have an impact on you going into the Marine Corps, or kind of what was the impetus behind that?
Well, it did. It definitely sent, planted seeds when I was a kid to kind of have some things grow up there. But I wasn't, it didn't take. I pretty much was in so much trouble when I was a kid and had such a rough childhood that I couldn't believe that there was actually a God. So, those seeds finally took root. It wasn't until right when I was getting out of the Marine Corps, my last year of the Marine Corps, is when I really got married. That was when God really took a hold of my heart.
Okay, I kind of feel the need to ask you because most of the people in this audience are going to be Protestants, and we have some Catholics. Now, there are people kind of in Protestant circles that look at Catholics almost like they're apostates. Like, look, these people believe in some random, dude with a pointy hat in Rome, and they think that he's magical, and they worship at the altar of Mary and all this kind of weird stuff. And so, but like with me, I believe that there are Baptists that aren't saved, just like I believe that there are Catholics that are not saved. I believe that there are people in all walks of Christian life that have not actually put their faith in Christ for the propitiation, the payment in full of their sin debt. But I kind of feel like with Catholics, they're more box checky. Because like Southern Baptist, I grew up in Oklahoma, and so as long as you're born in Oklahoma and listen to country music and vote Republican, you get to go to heaven because God's pro all those things. But with Catholics, it's like, okay, as long as I attend Mass a couple of times a year, and as long as I've been confirmed, then I'm good to go. Do you kind of experience that with what you've seen in your life?
Oh, absolutely. And you see that with a bunch of different ones, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, you could just, Mormons, you pick them out of the lineup, and unless you have that relationship, but who am I to say who's right and wrong? I just know that my walk with the Lord is, the best that I could do at this time right now, and just trying to do the best I can, because I'm not a check in the box kind of guy, and I don't follow rules very well at all, obviously. So, yeah, just doing the best I can, man.
Yeah, we'll certainly get there. So, all right, so military, you get married, all the kind of stuff, God snatches you up at some point. But at what point do you think, hey, I want to coach football? Like, where does like coaching football come into your world?
Yeah, so I was failing as a husband, and that's where I really turned to the Lord. And then it seemed when I made that promise to God that, hey, if you give me my wife, I'll give you my life. He took me up on that. And next thing I know, I'm being asked to coach high school football. And I don't know anything about football. I was 4'10" till my sophomore year. I was a wrestler and a boxer and stuff. So I was never a big guy. I was just a little guy. And so football just seemed kind of like a very weird thing for God to ask, but that's where it came about, is that God asked me to coach and help these young men. And I just, what was I going to say? No. Yeah. So I definitely had to.
Well, you could have said no. A lot of people would have said no. They would have been like, that must have been indigestion. That couldn't have been God. So how do you go? Because what's funny is I actually know several wrestlers that have been forced into coaching football. It's really strange because it's like football is a complicated game. I mean, yeah, you're trying to move, an inflated piece of pigskin from one place on the field to another place on the field. But man, it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. There's 22 guys on the field all at one time. Like, How do you do that? How do you go from a wrestling, boxing background? I'm sure you watch football, but how do you figure out how to like coach?
Yeah, and that was the beauty of it, because I was in the military, in the Marine Corps for 20 years. So leading men was just a natural thing that I've been doing my whole entire life. And I didn't care anything about football. This was just something that was my calling. So I never had to worry about learning the X's and O's. We had some of the best coaches you could possibly imagine, guys that played college, professional, was even in the Super Bowl. And these guys knew X's and O's. So only thing I had to focus on was little Johnny and Timmy. And that's what my whole thing was, is getting the most out of those young men out on the football field.
Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about that, because you've got some coaches. Excuse me, I know for a fact that there are some coaches, high school coaches of a lot of different sports listening to this podcast right now, and you have guys that may know the X's and O's of baseball, football, wrestling, basketball, whatever the sport is, but they struggle with making sure little Johnny's not a moron and making sure that little Johnny's there on time and that he gives full effort and all that. What were some things that you kind of picked up on and learned along the way that kind of helped you realize, all right, well, I've led men, but these are 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old boys. I can't exactly make them drop into the sand and do push-ups, right, or anything like that. But like, how do you kind of like have an impact and influence on those young men?
Yeah, and I think that was just a natural blessing that I had growing up, not having anybody in my life as far as a father figure. A lot of these young men that I was coaching, single families, pretty poor backgrounds and stuff, and they really just needed somebody to teach them how to become a young man. And that was the beauty of it, is that only thing I had to do was just listen to them, love them, and be hard on them at the same time, teach them about discipline and team building and leadership. And I didn't hold any punches with them. I was probably one of the meanest guys, but would in the next minute put my arms around them, hug them, and tell them I love them at the same time, So, you draw that line in the sand of where you're going to stand, and they will fall in line, because kids, especially men, they crave to be around men and to be men and to be able to be leaders, and just teaching them that, they just fall right into line because they crave that kind of desire.
Well, also, Joe, it's high expectations, because there are a lot of young men, because I've explained this a lot of different ways on the show, but it's like, if you set the expectations for a man right here, and then they end up here, that's bad, because they didn't meet the expectation and they're still really low. And for those of you just listening to this, I obviously have my hands towards the bottom of the screen. But as I put my hand at the top of the screen, if you set the expectations here and they miss it here, there's still this delta here, this tremendous amount of impact and improvement that they've made. So I think one of the problems that we have with men and young men is that we set the expectation bar so low and we don't demand anything more of them than what the minimum is. And then when they fail, we're shocked. It's like, well, we shouldn't really be shocked. And so you've got this job. You're working at Bremerton High School. You're wearing a Bremerton Knights shirt right now on the show. So guys watching on YouTube and Rumble, you can see that. And so obviously, a lot of people know where this story went. I mean, we're definitely going to ease our way into the story. But obviously, you're not in a very conservative place. You're not in a state where it's not like Oklahoma where every single county votes red in the general election. And so you had to kind of know there was going to be some anti-Christian, anti-faith, anti-conservative sentiments working for the government schools, because you're working in a public school in the public school system that gets their funding from, the atheistic, I guess, federal government and state governments. So did you get the sense that the people that were working there, or maybe the school board, that there were going to be a bunch of folks that were maybe not, cool with the things that you believe, behind closed doors?
No, really, it was quite the opposite. I know that the whole entire left coast is absolutely insane, and especially in the cities, you know how crazy the liberal mindset is, and they just kind of group thought. They have no original thoughts by themselves. But the people in our school, these people are my friends. We've worked together for almost a decade, and most of them are good, God-fearing. They go to church, at least respected, my faith. And I never thought that I would have a problem with this. And I always heard rumors about people, getting in trouble for doing this kind of stuff. But I didn't care in the slightest bit, because I was always open and honest about who I was and my faith. And I was going to exercise my rights as an American. It really wasn't a big Christian thing. It wasn't a big churchy thing to me. This was really all about me exercising my rights as an American to exercise my First Amendment rights.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and get to what caused all the kerfuffle. And so obviously you were in your coaching duties, so you're wearing your Bremerton Knights gear and all that. And at some point you decide that you were going to start praying on the field at the 50-yard line. So this is not an uncommon practice, right? So we see this in high school, in college, in the pros. We see players gather and hold hands with coaches before games, but you see it a lot of times after games where guys will join up and do a prayer circle. This is not an uncommon thing, but for you specifically, for Joe Kennedy, what was the impetus behind you deciding, okay, at this point of the game, or before or after the game, I'm going to go pray at the 50-yard line by myself? Take us through that.
I was offered the job as a coach on a Friday, and over that weekend I said, let me think about it. It's a big decision. I just got out of the Marine Corps. Do I really want to just start a whole new career now that I'm married and trying to raise a family? And so I'm up in the middle of the night watching TV, and the movie Facing the Giants came on, and it was like God just stuck his fist right through the TV set, grabbed onto my heart, and threw me on the ground. And I said, God, I'm all in. For the first time in my life, I heard my calling. And I, right there on my living room floor, and crying mess, and I'm just sobbing, and I'm like, God, I'm all in, and I will give you the glory after every game, win or lose, right there on the 50-yard line. And that's the way it really started, was just my covenant with God right at the very beginning. And from that moment on, I was after every game taking a knee, thanking God after every game, and it was no big deal.
Okay, and so did you have any consternation, any hesitation? Because I know some people, I remember when Tim Tebow would, the Tebowing thing was a thing, and he'd be on the sidelines in Florida and he'd be praying, and people would throw that scripture out there like, oh, he should be praying by himself. He shouldn't be making a public display of it. But it was like, guys, he wasn't telling, CBS where to point their cameras. Like, he just went to a place on the sideline by himself to go pray, and, you decided to put it on national television. But for you, was there any of that consternation for you whenever you were deciding, hey, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, not at the beginning. When the school kind of, started poo-pooing it, that's when I started questioning it, and people kept saying, well, why are you doing this? And I had that real struggle, because what do you do as a Christian? I mean, heck, I don't know. I don't know what the rules are. They always threw that one verse out, go pray in your closet. And Man, I'm on the opposite spectrum of that, and it's always give thanks to God, and it doesn't matter where you are. You could be in church, you could be on the 50-yard line, you could be at a restaurant. It shouldn't matter. I was looking at purely from an American lens and saying it doesn't matter where you pray. I'm not the rule follower. I'm just going to give God thanks whenever and wherever it's due.
Okay, and so at some point, you're not doing this alone. At some point, people notice what you're doing and they start to join in with you. So take us through that. Like, kind of, what were you feeling? What was the sense? Like, obviously, were you inviting people? Were you telling people, hey, come and pray with me or else you're fired? Like, what exactly were you doing?
Yeah, so it must have gone on for, I don't know, 3-6 months, something like that. Kids saw me out there after the game taking a knee. And I had a couple of my captains come up and ask, Coach, what are you doing out there after the game? And I said, just thanking God for what you guys did out there and for being part of it. And they wanted to know if they could join. I said, man, this is America and this is your team. You guys could do whatever the heck you want to do. And so they started coming out, and it kind of grew and grew. Then they asked, hey, can we invite the other team? Because, it's a small community. These kids go to, they play peewees together, and then they end up going to different high schools. And they said, hey, can we invite our friends from the other team? Yeah, your team, you guys could do whatever you want. So yeah, nobody ever cared if they showed up or if they didn't. It was never a big deal. Nobody even cared. And there was times that, if you lose by 60 points, obviously kids aren't wanting to be thankful. And, sometimes if they win by 60 points, they're so excited that they forget about giving thanks to the one who made them. So, but my thing was, win or lose, draw, didn't matter what the weather was. I'd take a knee in the mud and just thank God after every single game. And as the years went on, it just did grow, and we did have everybody on our team, well, almost everyone on our team, and every team in our league out there praying together after the games. In our last season, we had everybody out there.
Okay, so this went on for years. As you said, it's kind of no big deal. This is something that happens all over the place all the time. But apparently someone and a group of someone's did care about that, and that was the school board. And so at what point did you become aware that the school board was, at the very least, expressing concerns over the practice?
Well, I first heard because my wife, she was the HR director for the school district, so she heard all the buzz going on, and you can imagine being in HR, you hear everything going on. And
sure.
We thought it was no big deal at first because everything came from a compliment. One of the school officials from another school district saw what we were doing and called our principal and just relayed that what we were doing was awesome with our football program. So everything stemmed from this. And we thought we would just ride it out. It's not a big deal. It wasn't until the outside groups and it goes viral overnight that next thing you know, it's in the news and all these haters start showing up, and then the school starts getting all that pressure. And that's when we knew that this was going to just become a cluster. And it did. It became a mess really fast.
Okay, Joe. So as I understand it, and so correct me if I'm wrong, you began to meet with the school board. I think it was their request for you to meet with them, and they wanted you to stop. They said that this action, again, you praying after a game at the 50-yard line where people could just do it willy-nilly if they wanted to, that they said it was endangering students somehow, which makes me think that the school board is full of illiterate dunces if that's what they believe somebody praying after a game that they safely made it through is doing, and that it's actually a dangerous thing. But so did they request to have meetings with you, and how did those meetings go?
Yeah, we met quite a bit. The superintendent is actually a really good friend of mine, and we thought we could work it all out just being normal people and talk it out and figure out how to navigate through this. And we went through a couple different iterations where they said, well, stop praying with the team. So I stopped praying with the team. I never prayed with the team after they told me to stop praying with them. And then about a week later, the the team that we were playing against came and joined us. So they didn't know what to do with that. And they said, well, we just will eliminate the prayer altogether. That's where I knew I had to make a stand, and I had to draw a line in the sand and say, no, this is just crazy. This is stupid. You guys are talking about hypothetical things here that somebody might be offended, and, you know, this could cause a lawsuit. And I was always straight up and honest with these guys. And I was like, man, I guarantee I will fight for this, because the rights of Americans is more important than somebody's feelings. And that's really what it came down to is they got scared, and I said, I'm not going to live in fear, especially in this country. And I stood up for my rights.
Yeah, cowardice is a disease that is infecting so many places in society, and certainly bureaucrats really utilize cowardice a lot of times. And so obviously you decide you're going to continue doing this. You decide that you're going to make a stand, and then the school board decides, well, we're just not going to renew your contract to be a coach. And so it's essentially being fired, but people are like, oh, they just didn't renew his contract. It's like, what is that called, dummy? Whenever you're a contract person, is that basically means that you're being fired, okay? And so you're fired from your job. You're no longer doing this thing that, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, that you felt like God was calling you to do. Take us through that. What did that feel like?
I was very confused at something so stupid like this. And, you know, I mean, we all work together. We're all, this is a small community, and we can't work this out ourselves. I mean, even to this day, I can't understand why it made such a big deal. And when they put the stamp on there that says, do not rehire, you know, that sealed my fate on there. And I mean, I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. And there's certain things that are worth fighting for. And I didn't know if this was one of them at the time. You know, what do you do with this? This is a 15-second prayer on a football field. Is this really worth losing your job, your team, potentially my marriage, all the things that were going on, and the fight that it took our community into? And I really struggled with it, and so did the school. But I was just, there was something in my spirit that said, you know, it's those little things. I tell these guys to fight for what is right, even if it's not popular. And now all of a sudden I'm going to give up because it's become, difficult for me. I mean, I would have been the biggest hypocrite in the world. I had to stand up for what was right. And this was obviously something so simple that, you know, if I gave this up, what's next? You know, if the First Amendment falls, then the Second and the Third. I mean, it just tumbles out of control. And we've given up so much as a society of being, you know, backed up into corners saying, well, that doesn't affect me. That doesn't affect me. Well, this affected me, and it was going to affect everybody else. And they knew that the right thing to do was just, you know, let us pray on the field afterwards. But instead of that, they wanted to live according to their fear. And if they didn't want to stand up, well, heck, I sure the heck would. And I was willing to give up everything for this so other people didn't ever have to be put in this position.
Hey guys, real quick. Do you remember during the pandemic when you basically couldn't get anything shipped to your house? All this manufacturing that was supposed to be taking place in America had been shipped overseas, and you just didn't notice it. And I remember a bunch of companies saying, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we bring manufacturing back to America, and almost none of them followed through on that promise. But for me and for all of us here at Undaunted.Life, I wanted to make sure that I partnered with an American company that actually did want to prioritize American workers, their families, their communities, and a company that would keep their word. And that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and what do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet, and the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they have stretchy jeans. They also have work jeans and bootcut jeans for you guys as well. They make amazing hunting gear. And here's the thing. I know you guys like some other hunting brands, but those companies are American companies that use overseas labor to increase their profit margins on their gear, not to help you or Americans out. They also offer handmade leather boots. That does include steel toe boots and mock toe boots. And they also make workout clothes and everyday pants and shirts and almost indestructible hoodies. And they're launching new apparel all the time. Guys, if you haven't already tried Origin stuff, you need to check them out and support a company that supports Americans. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. Well, I think it's very interesting, and I've said this a lot on the show, but especially with conservatives and Christian conservatives, they never find a hill that's worth dying on. the way Eric Metaxas says it is they're leaving powder for tomorrow's battle, but the war might be over by then. And so you have all these people that they never really find something. I mean, you go back to, we started a war over taxation, which is a fraction of the taxation that we're experiencing now. And apparently we're all just okay with it. So at some point, you obviously, Joe, you could have just, taken it and, licked your wounds or just did something else. But you obviously made a different decision. You decided to sue. And so you filed suit in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. You sued to regain your job. But what was the scope of the lawsuit that you filed?
Yeah, it was really super simple. Only thing that I asked for was for them to clarify, hey, I wanted to be reinstated as a coach, and I wanted it to be able to exercise my rights to pray after a football game. It was only 2 asks that I had, and it was something so simple as that. It never changed, it never varied from that. And from the very beginning, for the next 8 years, that's all I fought for, was just my right to be able to pray after a football game. And I mean, it was the simplest thing in the world. That's why it was so shocking to me that it went all the way to the Supreme Court twice over something so simple as, can you pray after a football game?
It's simple to say, and it should be simple in practice as well. But so let's talk about a little bit of the court proceedings without turning this into a courtroom drama. But you lost an appeal. I believe it was at the Ninth Circuit of appeals. And then at that point, when you lose that appeal, there's only one other place to appeal to, and that is to the Supreme Court of the United States. And so obviously for those that aren't aware, not every case that is taken to the Supreme Court is accepted by the Supreme Court. The justices do get to decide which cases they are going to accept and deliver a ruling on, which ones they're going to send back to the lower courts, all that kind of stuff. And so take us through the process of you figuring out, okay, we're not just going to let these appeals lie. We're going to take this all the way to the top.
Yeah. Well, when they said the way that the lower courts ruled was terrifying to me, and was my biggest concern, is that the lower court, the Court of Appeals, they said that any display of religion in the public square can be grounds for termination. That freaked me out. Could you imagine that if that would have stuck? Anything. If you were to wear a yarmulke or a cross, or a cross on your ears, the lunch ladies or anything. You think about any display of religion in the public square, that could get you terminated. So that's where we absolutely had to keep fighting and to stand up for what we were doing and take it all the way to the end, because that couldn't stand.
Okay, so you decide you're going to do it, but it's another thing. Well, let's just take this slowly. You appeal to the Supreme Court, and they accept your case. I forget what that's exactly called. It's escaping me right now. But what was that like? Where you're like, holy crap, we're taking this to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and that was weird. That was really weird. That because I think about 6,000 or 7,000 cases get submitted to the Supreme Court every year, and they take maybe 60 of them. So I mean, the chances are not good whatsoever. And so when they did take it, I was like, man, this is our only chance. Is that this is the last line of defense. There's nothing else after this. So I was going to have to live with whatever they were going to rule. But I had the faith and confidence that I was on the right side of things. The First Amendment seems so simple and so clear to me that I can't believe nobody ever and didn't even look at the facts of the case.
Right.
If you just look at that alone, you would sit there and say, yeah, I mean, why are we even fighting this fight? Why is this even in the courts? So I was confident that the Supreme Court was going to look at it and rule on what the Constitution says and the facts of the case.
So Constitution, facts of the case. That's how it should roll, but we have some people on the United States Supreme Court that aren't justices. They're actually, advocates. They're basically community organizers that got jobs. They're like theater kids that ended up getting jobs on the Supreme Court because we live in the dumbest time in human history. But take us through it, because most people listening to this have never had a case. Obviously, go all the way to Supreme Court. We really know nothing about it. We hear about it in June, the most controversial of decisions. We hear about those, and then we can fight as to whether or not we agree or disagree with what came down and whether or not we love or hate Justice Roberts at the moment. But from your perspective, how much involvement did you have in this case? How often were you there? What was it like working with the lawyers? Like, just take us through the process of your case now being at the Supreme Court.
And the only thing I really had to, that I was part of, was the depositions and being able to tell my side of the story and listen to when they deposed all the people in the school district. So I sat in the same room as they were taking their depositions, which is pretty stressful. It kind of sucks to sit there and hear your friends tell their side of everything, good and bad. I mean, everything is out there for the world to see, and you have to have some tough conversations during that. The rest of the time, it's so frustrating because you're not part of anything.
Yeah.
You lawyers prep for the court, and every time they're in court, they tell us what the game plan is. We go through everything, and you tell them all the things that we want to, like what I want to say, but I'm not allowed to talk at all. You're not allowed to say a single thing in court. It's not like Law and Order where you see them, doing all this legal stuff. It's one guy talking and the other team or the other side telling all their stories that aren't even true, and nobody questions them on it. It is the most frustrating thing in the world just to have to sit there and listen to people talk and tell your story. And you got to put your trust into the lawyers, and that's what it is. I had great lawyers. God knew what he was doing when he got our legal team, and we had the guy, especially at the Supreme Court, Paul Clement. He's done more cases at the Supreme Court than anybody else in history. So we had the top guy, number one lawyer in the entire world, pleading our case. And so I was confident, but it's frustrating and it's stressful just to put all your faith and confidence in somebody else where you have no say in it whatsoever.
That's not fun at all. I'm a very controlling individual, and so even just the description of that, I got like secondhand anxiety just hearing you talk about that. But let's go ahead and get to June the 27th of 2022. This is where you get the decision. So give us the run up to decision day. How are you feeling? How is the team feeling? Are you confident? Are you pessimistic? Like what's the feeling like, in the locker room? And then take us to the decision itself.
Yeah, we were very optimistic. My lawyers, they were probably more realistic than optimistic. I was optimistic for the simple fact of this is stupid. I can't believe this is even this is even here. But realistically, they were looking at it and saying that, hey, we do have 9 justices, and it could go whichever way, and whatever, there's no recourse after this. And so they were confident, but they were realistic that in life that you can lose these things. I on the other hand, had all the faith and trust in my lawyers and in God that he wouldn't have taken me through 8 years of this crap to just lose. And so I was very optimistic all the way through to the end, and it was stressful up to that point. And my biggest fear was that if I did lose, I was going to screw this up for everybody in America, that anybody showing any sign of religion in the public square could be terminated. And that would have been on my watch. It would have been because of my case. And I screwed it for everybody in the entire country. That was my only fear. And I wasn't really concerned about necessarily winning. It was, I didn't want to lose and have this be the precedent for all times and have my name on that. So, up to the moment when it did come out, and that Dobbs came out the week before, which was the Roe versus Wade overturn. So ours kind of came in under the radar, even though we have more impact. This case had more impact on religious freedoms than any other case in history, which is so cool. But that was the cool thing about God and his sense of humor, is that he knew what he was doing, and he slid it right underneath Dobbs, and he kind of went under the radar. So we have more religious freedom now in America than we've ever had in the past 50 years, which is, to me, that's freaking awesome. And it was not blown up, and nobody really got to fight against it or have riots or anything like they did over Dobbs and the whole abortion thing. Ours was just kind of underneath the radar, and I had that sense of, man, it was just, the weight of the world is off my shoulders now, because I knew I was right. Everything I stood for was true, and the First Amendment does mean what it says it means.
Yeah, so by a 6-3 decision, the lower court rulings were overturned. You had won. This was finally, well, it was kind of over because part of this whole thing is that you wanted your job back. And so this was like this big, long thing, almost a decade long of your life, like where you're going through this entire process, not just for you, but for all of the other folks that could be caught up in the same position as you've already elucidated. But then you take your job back. And so part of me is wondering, because as I understand it, you take your job back, you go back for one game and then you resign. And so was that just like, did you go back, you did the one game and you realized like, man, I really don't want to do this, I'm out of here? Was that the plan from the beginning? Because part of me is like, I would have told him to, hey, take 2 of these and call me in the morning, and like just been like, hey, I did this all, I drug y'all through the mud, and now we're not even going to get the payoff in the end. Take me through the decision-making process of taking your job back, doing the one game, then resigning and leaving.
Yeah. So I showed up in the spring when they had to reinstate me. I showed up that day for spring ball. They gave me my reinstatement letter right there at the school district office. I showed up that day and said, hey, I'm here to be reinstated. And they kind of were in a panic mode, not really believing that I was going to show back up. And they gave me my letter. I went down to the high school and met the head coach. And I said, Coach, here I am. And he says, well, this sucks, is neither one of us have any say in this. So you're going to be my coach and we'll make the best that we can. Well, the school district had other plans, and they started acting like a bunch of little kids and said, oh, well, you don't have this qualification. You didn't take this class. So for the first 2 weeks of spring ball, I didn't even get a step on the field. I sat there and watched from the bleachers while they did all their practices, and I was taking all my little courses on CPR and all the other things that I've needed to get caught up over the past 8 years. So when I didn't get a join at spring ball, I said, fine, we'll play these little games. I'll meet all the things and we'll try again here in the fall. And so I showed up for the first day of fall camp, just like this, ready to go, and had all my qualifications. So I worked out with the team, did the 2 days, had fall camp. I worked out with the team every single day. But the school, I just couldn't believe the way that they acted. They wouldn't let me go into the coach's office. I wasn't allowed to go into the locker room. I wasn't allowed to go to the meals with the kids. I wasn't able to meet with the parents. I wasn't to directly talk to the team. I could do the rah-rah thing running up and down the field, but I couldn't address the team or individuals on the team. So they made it really they took all the fun out of coaching. And I played the little game up to that, up to the first game that we had. And then it was like, what do I do at this point? They were like, stay the heck out of our way. You have no responsibilities. Just stay out of the way of us coaches. And it left a bad taste in my mouth. And after that first game, I said, I have better things to do with my life than be treated like this. And now I'm a distraction for the team and everything else. I'm like, man, I'm out. And so my wife and I, that was our first decision we got to make in 8 years. We made that decision together. And so we said, hey, let's let the school heal, let us go heal and go move on with our lives, because we don't need any of this crap that's going on. And so it wasn't like I just showed up for one game and left. There was a whole bunch of stuff behind it. And I just thought it was best to be able to walk away on my own terms instead of, giving into the pressure of those guys.
Yeah, pettiness. It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible quality in people, rather. And so, unfortunately, you had to deal with a few heaping, servings of that. And so at some point, you and your wife, you're healing, you've moved on to a degree, but now your story is going to be made into a major motion picture. And so Average Joe is a movie that was made about your situation, guys. You can go and stream that now. There will be a link in the bio where you can go and check that out, or a link in the show notes of this, rather. And so let's talk about that. Like, how were you approached? How was your story turned in to, a script, which was going to be turned into a movie? What was your involvement with the film? Let's talk about Average Joe.
Yeah, it was really weird. I had a guy come up to me after I right at the very beginning of the court case, I was going around telling the story and getting the public aware of what was happening here in America. And somebody heard my testimony, and the guy said, "Man, that sounds like a movie," and came up to me and said, "Hey, let's make a movie of this." And I thought the guy was on crack. I'm sitting going, seriously, this is not, this is just my life. This isn't movie stuff. But he was adamant about it, and we started the development of it from that moment on. And I always took it with a half grain of salt. They sent a writer up, and we, if you've seen the movie, we sat down on the couch, and it was very much like that. The writer sat there on our couch. My wife and I, we told our story, our life stories, and yeah, they kind of developed from there. And we had COVID that happened all during that time. We had the Writers Guild. They were on strike, so there was a whole bunch of nonsense going on in Hollywood, but it just came out right at the perfect time, and I was part of the writing of it. We got to go onto the set. We actually did a cameo in the movie. I got to meet all the actors that played me, and my wife got to meet with them. It was a trip. It was a really cool experience to sit down and see your life kind of unfold in front of you out there on the screen and see how movies are made.
Okay, so you got to see how the sausage was made there on the front end. So let's talk about the back end. How do you think the film turned out? How do you like it?
I really liked it. I like the director's cut a whole lot better because it shows all the, the deleted scenes, all the bloopers, all the real stuff. And, they got to cut everything down to fit into a normal sized movie. I would have had some of the more controversial things in there, but the guys that were the ones making it, they wanted to keep it, PG-13, and, my life definitely was not PG-13, but overall, it has a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And that was my biggest thing, is that I wanted it to be good. I didn't want it to be some cheesy, religious film. I wanted this to be real life, and I wanted people to be on an emotional roller coaster where one minute they're laughing, the next minute they want to punch a wall. I want them to feel what it's like to be a real American and to have a real story where it's not, rainbows and butterflies and all that kind of stuff, that it shows the down and dirty of life and tells our story that was true. We didn't want it to be Hollywood. We wanted a true story. And I think they did a phenomenal job of that. Director Harold Kronk and Eric Close that played me, I think they just did a fantastic job. These dudes were just, man, we're still friends. We talk to each other about every week now still.
Okay, very good. Well, guys, again, you can check that out in the show notes. I did want to, shift gears away from the movie and your particular story. Something that I've talked about a lot on this podcast is about education and education of our children, because I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so, when my wife was pregnant with our firstborn and we had a feeling it was going to come to term, it's like, oh crap, we got to figure out how to educate this thing. And so you start looking at all the options. My wife and I are both products of public school, but obviously when we were in the public school system in the 90s and early 2000s, it's not like what it is today. You don't have some of the DEI programs. You don't have some of the woke school curriculum. You don't have some of this, hey, we're going to put the white students on one side of the class and then all the students of color on the other side. And we're going to have these kids apologize to these kids and we'll call it social emotional learning and, all these types of things, right? So we didn't have to deal with that. We didn't have to deal with, people discussing trans identity and what does your gender feel like today, and we're asking that to 5-year-olds in kindergarten. And so the decision that I've come to is that there really are only 2 viable options for educating your children, and that's vetted private Christian school and homeschool. Because the public school system, even if you live in a red state, and I'll tell you the story, I've told it on the show as well. The state of Oklahoma is as red as it gets, right? Every single county votes red. I think in the general election, it was us in West Virginia, where every single county voted red. And I live in one of the reddest parts of this red state, but not even 10 minutes away from my house, there's a middle school where one of my buddies had a kid that was in one of the classes in middle school. It was like English or something like that. A substitute teacher comes in and writes they/them on the blackboard and then turns around to the class, introduces themselves and says, "Hi, I'm such and such so-and-so. I'm non-binary. What questions do you have?" When their job is, what page did you get into on, Lord of the Flies yesterday? That's their actual job, but they go up and do that. Now the toothpaste is out of the tube. Their young kid comes home and says, "Hey, Dad, what's non-binary?" Like our teacher said that. And so obviously there are people that think, hey, you can't vilify the entire public school system. There are great people that work there. There are Christian principals. There are Christian school board members. There are Christian parents that are involved. All that may be true, but you can't, as Vodi Bakum would say, send your kids off to the Roman schools and expect not to get back Romans. So where have you kind of landed, even because you were not just behind the scenes, you were on the front lines of this battle for a very, very long time?
Yeah, I'm 100% against public school now. I'm a product of public school. My wife worked for almost 20 years for public schools, and we were pro public school until we did, like you said, when you see how the sausage is made, it's horrible. Teacher unions alone is enough to just turn your stomach. But we don't teach our kids what they're supposed to learn. They're trying to raise our kids instead of teaching our kids. And so I've been 100% against public school ever since then. And I'm with you, man. Take your kids, put them in a private school, or you're going to teach them at home, because they're only learning crap in schools of what. And I have to admit, they knew what they were doing, and they planned this for a long time. And it was brilliant on their part. If you want to raise Romans, send them to the school. You exactly said it. So I am 100% with you that public school is nothing but trash now. And unfortunately, most people don't have the funds or the resources to do the other alternatives to that. So a lot of kids are being led astray. Obviously, we can see where our society is right now, and where kids are, where they don't even know if they're a boy or a girl. Give me a freaking break. If you need to, and where are parents in all of this too? So I mean, there's enough blame to be thrown around, but parents need to pay attention to what the heck's going on, and men especially need to start paying attention to their kids and be involved in their lives and know what the heck they're being taught, and start teaching them how to be good men and women in society, instead of the school relying on the school to do it.
And guys, I agree with that, certainly. And there are a lot of resources for people that want to try to go the vetted private Christian route or the homeschool route, because for some people are like, I can't afford private school. And for some people that is legitimate. But like in the state of Oklahoma, I think Arizona, some other states, they have universal school choice. They have these tax incentives for people that want to have their kids in private school, where they can pay for part of it if they apply for it. And there's things like that. And guys, there are so many homeschool resources out there that I'm personally aware of. Like for my wife and I, we're both entrepreneurs. And so the homeschool thing wasn't really going to work out for us in kind of like our daily life and our daily activities. But for a lot of people, it's like, you're like, well, how can we possibly pull that off? There are answers to that. There are answers all over the internet. There are people that you can find, Christian curriculum, and a lot of things that you can do. And again, it depends on what you want as a family and what you value, because a lot of people will talk about with homeschool, it's like, look, my kids are done with their schoolwork by 10 or 11 a.m. And then the rest of the day is, hey, they're helping out on the farm, or hey, they're going out and doing this activity, or going out and doing that activity. But some people don't necessarily value that as much, because like for my wife and I, we learned a lot inside the classroom, but we also learned a lot outside the classroom. We learned from being on teams. We learned from stuff we experienced in the hallways and the bathrooms and the locker rooms. We learned from a lot of different things. And so it's not just the education piece. It's what else are they doing with that time? And so as parents, yes, you need to be involved. You need to make the best decision for your kid, and not just, turn your brain off and just send them off to the Roman schools. But Joe, I really appreciate all the time that you spent with me. I want to make this the last question of the day. What are you doing now? And what does the future hold for you and the rest of the Kennedy clan?
Yeah. Well, we moved down to Pensacola, Florida to take care of my wife's dad, who's not doing well with health wise. And so we'll be with him for the rest of his days. But in between then, this is going to be the big year. 2025 is our year that we're going to make some major decisions on what we're going to do with our lives, and go with whatever direction God's pulling us to. We're looking at a bunch of different ministries, and this is going to be the year. It's going to be huge for us, and we're really excited and very optimistic about what's going to happen in 2025, especially with the new regime coming in for the presidency in the House and the Senate. I'm optimistic for America, and I want to be very much part of it and being proactive in making this country a hell of a lot better than what it has been in the past.
Okay. Well, Joe, I really appreciate it. Again, we weaved in and out of this. I really appreciate you taking us along on this journey and telling us your story. But that's all from me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, I appreciate it, buddy. I look forward to coming back over to see my friends in Oklahoma and meeting with you live and doing this.
Okay, sounds good to me. Let me know. Thanks, Joe. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Average Joe Kennedy. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. And here's the thing. You guys can get your movies wherever you get your movies. I mean, people tell me, oh, I watched this on this platform or that platform. I don't know where all you're getting your stuff. So I left you a link to where you can watch it on Amazon. So if you're an Amazon person, if you support Amazon, if you like Amazon, you can watch Average Joe there. But make sure you watch it wherever you get your movies. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.